Prince Andrew has finally been spotted at the gates of what many are now calling his house of exile, a quiet, almost understated moment that nonetheless signals something definitive and perhaps permanent: the end of his life as a high-ranking royal resident of Windsor. This is not merely a man moving from one property to another. It is the visible, physical expression of a king's decision, the material proof of a decree that closes a long, uncomfortable chapter in the story of the British monarchy. It is the sound of a door finally shutting, not with a dramatic slam, but with a measured, deliberate finality. And so, here we are, watching history unfold not in a throne room or on a palace balcony, but at the threshold of a farmhouse, far from the ceremonial heart of royal life. This relocation of the Duke of York is a story that has gripped royal watchers around the world, not because of its glamour, but because of what it represents: consequence, change, and the reshaping of an institution that has learned, sometimes painfully, that tradition alone is no longer enough to shield it from modern scrutiny. The image itself is almost cinematic in its understatement. Prince Andrew, once surrounded by aides, footmen, and layers of deference, now standing inside the rooms of a 5-bedroom farmhouse, peering at windows, thinking about curtains, measuring spaces that will define the boundaries of his future. A decade ago, such a scene would have been almost unthinkable. For nearly 20 years, he lived ensconced in the sprawling 30-room grandeur of Royal Lodge, set deep within Windsor Great Park, a property steeped in royal history and wrapped in layers of privacy and prestige. That life, with its long driveways, manicured lawns, and sense of untouchable permanence, has now given way to Marsh Farm on the Sandringham estate, a place that, while comfortable and undeniably privileged by any normal standard, marks a dramatic shift in status, lifestyle, and proximity to power. This weekend, observers caught their first glimpse of the Duke at his new home, and with that sighting came the undeniable realization that this is no longer theoretical. This is happening. The move is real, and the consequences are settling in. No longer is Andrew the favored son, cushioned by the late Queen Elizabeth II's instinctive maternal protection and her lifelong habit of finding ways to accommodate her children. That era has ended. In its place stands the firm, pragmatic, modernizing hand of his elder brother, King Charles III, a monarch shaped by decades of preparation and a keen awareness of public perception. The decision has been made, the machinery of relocation set in motion, and the sense of inevitability is now impossible to ignore. For months, the headlines were dominated by stories of a standoff at Royal Lodge, a kind of quiet siege in which Andrew was said to be refusing to leave the home he had occupied since 2004. There were reports of his determination to stay, his reliance on the 75-year lease he signed long ago, and his belief that, as a prince of the blood, he was entitled to a certain standard of living. Yet patience, even royal patience, has its limits. By withdrawing private security funding estimated at around £3 million a year, and making it clear that the upkeep of Royal Lodge was no longer a priority for the Crown Estate's central finances, King Charles sent an unmistakable message. The era of Prince Andrew's old royal lifestyle was over. To grasp the full weight of this decision, one must understand what Royal Lodge represented. It was never just a house. It was a symbol, a stronghold of royal continuity, once home to the Queen Mother herself. It embodied a certain kind of private royal life, removed from public gaze yet central to the family's internal world. When Andrew moved in after her death, he signed that long lease and committed to maintaining the property at his own expense. He reportedly poured millions into renovations, transforming it into a residence befitting a senior working royal with a young family. For him, Royal Lodge became more than bricks and mortar. It was proof that he still belonged at the heart of the Windsor establishment. It was his base, the place where he hosted dignitaries, entertained business leaders, and operated during his years as a special trade envoy. Leaving it behind is not simply about losing a home. It is about losing the tangible evidence of his former relevance, the investment of money, effort, and identity that he placed into those walls. Now those grand rooms stand largely empty, waiting for an uncertain future, while Andrew faces a far humbler reality. The move to Marsh Farm is therefore not just a change of address. It is a deliberate downsizing that reflects King Charles's vision of a slimmer, more financially responsible monarchy. On paper, a 5-bedroom house on the Sandringham estate sounds enviable. To most people, it would be the home of a lifetime. But within the rarefied world of the British royal family, it represents a clear demotion. Marsh Farm sits in a quiet, relatively isolated part of the Norfolk countryside, far removed from the political and social heartbeat of Windsor and London. It lacks the architectural grandeur and symbolic weight of Andrew's former residence. It is a functional farmhouse, designed for comfort and practicality rather than for the projection of royal authority. This is Norfolk exile in the truest sense. Windsor is a stone's throw from the capital, from government, from influence. Sandringham, by contrast, is where royals retreat, where they disappear into mud, marshes, and the sharp winds blowing in from the North Sea. For a man who once flew across continents as a representative of British trade and diplomacy, the silence of the Norfolk fens must feel profoundly disorienting. The contrast is stark. The sheltered, manicured expanses of Windsor Great Park, where Andrew could move unseen behind gates and forests, have been exchanged for a landscape that is wide, open, and exposed. Insiders suggest that this realization has hit him hard. A friend of the Duke described his recent visit to Marsh Farm as sobering, the first moment when he truly understood that this was not a temporary stop, but the setting for the next chapter of his life. According to this source, Andrew has reached a point of resignation. He knows he must simply get on with it. There are reports that he is trying to make the best of the situation, involving himself in small, almost mundane details of the renovations. Measuring curtains, considering fabrics, thinking about how to arrange rooms. For a man accustomed to delegating such matters to a large household staff, this hands-on engagement feels significant. Perhaps it is his way of reclaiming some control over a life that has been stripped of its former structure and purpose. There is something undeniably poignant, even humbling, about the image of a prince of the realm worrying about window dimensions. Yet the transition has not been greeted with universal sympathy, particularly among local residents. In Norfolk, the reaction is a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and blunt realism. One local, speaking to the media, pointed out a key difference between Marsh Farm and Royal Lodge: privacy. At Windsor, Andrew was shielded by acres of parkland. At Marsh Farm, the house sits close to a public road. There is no long drive, no natural buffer. "He'll be right on the road," the resident remarked. "He won't get much peace." This detail matters. For years, Andrew has lived almost like a ghost within the Windsor estate, rarely seen, able to maintain a semblance of seclusion despite intense public interest. At Marsh Farm, every delivery, every visitor, every step outside will be visible. In an age where everyone carries a smartphone, the Duke's private life is about to become far more public. The isolation of Norfolk brings a different kind of exposure, one without the high walls and deep parkland to hide behind. This lack of privacy also raises practical concerns. The security implications are significant. Without the sovereign-funded ring of steel that once surrounded him, Andrew is now a high-profile figure living in a property with limited natural defenses. He remains a magnet for media attention, for protesters, and for the merely curious. Ensuring his safety in such circumstances is a logistical headache, and it underscores how precarious his new position really is. He is still a prince, but no longer protected as one in the traditional sense. And this brings us back to the issue of security, a crucial element in understanding the king's strategy. When Charles withdrew the estimated £3 million a year in private security funding, he was doing more than saving money. He was aligning the situation with the standards of the committee responsible for royal and public figure protection. Since Andrew is no longer a working royal, the argument that taxpayers should fund his round-the-clock armed security has long been difficult to justify. By relocating him to Sandringham, an estate that already has perimeter security, Charles reduces the individual cost while still meeting a basic duty of care. It is a calculated, almost textbook example of modern royal management. Public opinion, however, remains unforgiving. Another neighbor voiced a sentiment that resonates across much of the country. Even this place is too good for him. The comment reflects lingering anger over the scandals that forced Andrew out of public life. To many, a 5-bedroom house on a royal estate hardly feels like punishment. It highlights the vast gulf between royal privilege and everyday reality. Even in exile, a prince lives a life beyond the reach of most. This tension is central to the ongoing debate about the monarchy's place in modern Britain. Marsh Farm itself presents challenges beyond symbolism and status. The Norfolk landscape is beautiful but vulnerable. A flood risk assessment conducted nearby painted a cautious picture. The land is low-lying, reclaimed from the sea, and dependent on infrastructure like pumping stations to keep water at bay. A failure in that system could place properties like Marsh Farm at risk. The irony is hard to miss. As Andrew grapples with the metaphorical flooding of his reputation, he now lives on land that faces the literal threat of rising waters. It is as if instability has followed him, embedded in the very ground beneath his feet. For palace planners, the last thing they want is further headlines, this time about emergency pumps and sandbags. There is also an unavoidable historical echo in this move. Sandringham was where Prince Philip spent much of his retirement at Wood Farm, choosing a quieter life after decades of service. But where Philip's retreat was voluntary and dignified, Andrew's feels enforced. The distinction is not lost on royal historians. Sandringham has always been a place of family gatherings and private respite, but for Andrew, it may become something closer to a gilded cage. A reminder of what has been lost, rather than a reward for service rendered. King Charles's role in all of this is central. Since ascending the throne, he has faced the delicate task of modernizing the monarchy while managing deeply personal family issues. His decision on Andrew's housing is widely seen as his final word on the matter. By moving his brother out of Windsor and into Sandringham, Charles is closing the book on Andrew's time at the heart of royal life. It is a signal that the new reign will prioritize accountability, optics, and sustainability. Those who do not serve the public will not enjoy the trappings of public-funded privilege. Sources suggest the king is tired of the constant controversy and eager to move on, focusing on his duties, the health of the queen, and preparing Prince William for the future. In that vision, Andrew is a figure from another era, to be settled quietly so the institution can move forward. The personal dynamics add another layer, particularly where Sarah, Duchess of York, is concerned. Despite their divorce, she has continued to live with Andrew and has remained fiercely loyal. Her recent health challenges have shifted priorities, and the move to Marsh Farm will inevitably affect her too. Smaller quarters mean a different way of living, closer, more contained, more ordinary. The Yorks, once a powerful brand, are being physically and socially downsized. Financially, the move makes sense. Royal Lodge is part of the Crown estate, its upkeep a matter of public interest. Marsh Farm, by contrast, sits within the king's private holdings. Shifting Andrew there effectively moves him off the public balance sheet and into the realm of private family responsibility. It is a savvy, protective maneuver for the monarchy, insulating it from accusations of misusing public resources. And finally, there is the human question. How does a man once celebrated as a Falklands War hero, a globe-trotting prince, and a symbol of royal confidence adapt to a quieter life in rural Norfolk? Friends say he is trying to be pragmatic. He knows the world has changed, and he knows his brother will not bend. The renovations at Marsh Farm are not just practical, they are symbolic preparations for a new, smaller life. Space for family visits, yes, but no grand halls for lavish entertaining. The days of power lunches and high-level meetings are over. What remains is the challenge of finding meaning without a public role, of adjusting to the quiet rhythms of a world that no longer revolves around him. There is something almost universally relatable in that struggle. Downsizing, redefining oneself, facing the loss of status and identity. These are experiences many encounter in later life, albeit without the glare of global attention. The story of Prince Andrew is, in many ways, Shakespearean. A prince who fell from grace, now living in a windswept corner of the coast. For those who remember him as the dashing young pilot, the contrast is stark and sobering. It is a reminder that time spares no one, and that consequence eventually reaches even the most privileged. And as the British monarchy looks to its future, this quiet relocation, played out far from the cameras of Buckingham Palace, may prove to be one of the most telling symbols of an institution learning, adapting, and drawing its lines anew.